uh, last session and mild sense of fatigue, but I will one thing I must say that in my 2 years experience here, the last session is normally not as well attended as this afternoon's, because I have seen a lot of empty chairs and benches also, but there is a fair representation and I see more people coming in. And why I'm saying this is just to drive home a point that yesterday and today have probably been two very invigorating days where we have discussed a whole lot of issues under the sun, which don't normally get debated in the IDSA with such a varied audience with distinguished speakers from different countries. So the importance of what has been discussed cannot be underestimated, and the divergence of views which has come across is to be appreciated, and one can make out that some of these views are very, very individual. And while I was tempted to summarize what all had transpired, then I realized that others would have done the same. We have discussed a few important themes rather. We've discussed water in detail. We've discussed climate change. Along with that, we've discussed something very interesting about cooperation in the Bay of Bengal in great detail. We've discussed connectivity. We've discussed energy. We have discussed terrorism. And we have discussed intelligence sharing. Each of these subjects needs a seminar by itself. For example, in connectivity, we have some experience of this because we have had some discussions earlier. These 6-7 topics which I have listed out affect all the nations in South Asia, and they have been selected naturally with this in view to see how we can go forward in this. So what I'm going to do is that all our panelists are here, except for Mr. Yusuf, so his turn comes last. We'll start from the right, and people are supposed to give a way forward. So that let us see what our panelists have to say. So I will not give them too much of time, so they need not worry. I will give them just about 5 minutes to put across what they want to say, and then after those 5 minutes, then I will request people sitting here to just mull over it and see if there is something they can add or subtract or improve upon. So with that, I will start with our colleague from Myanmar on the extreme right. Sir, you essentially spoke about the situation in South Asia as regards the state of terrorism and radicalization, and how the responsibility of the state, what the scope of the responsibility of the state to manage a situation which has been going on for many years. That essentially was the theme of what you said. So now, after having listened to all these issues, so on whichever subject you feel comfortable to speak on as to what should be the way forward, not necessarily on all the subject, whatever you feel comfortable on, which I would request you to just give your views. 5 minutes should be enough.
Thank you. It's been a very interesting 2 days, and like I said earlier this morning, I'm very glad that I've been invited. Of course, since we're talking about security, that's hard security as well as non-traditional security, and I was requested to talk about the particular subject, but then all the other topics too, the issues are just as relevant. Water is relevant, energy is relevant, connectivity is relevant. So it's very pertinent. But if I may just go back to the issue that I spoke on, it's because, let's say, because of Myanmar's particular situation and circumstances that could impact upon the region, and quite negatively. Let's say that. We can talk about trade, we can talk about energy, and also water. But right now, I would say the most critical issue that we are confronted with is this one of, let's say, well, statelessness, that could lead to violence, and many ripples, many concentric circles of violence that could stretch out. Already, I think, because of the number of displaced people, and refugees, Bangladesh is, feeling the burden. India to some extent, and it could also stretch to other countries in ASEAN. And I think I would say that, as I said, Myanmar is kind of a bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. In BIMSTEC, we know that. But this is an issue that affects South Asia as well as Southeast Asia. So I think, first of all, we need more cooperation, close cooperation on this. At the same time, we need better and deeper consultation with the key policymakers. I feel that the policymakers, decision makers in my country have tended to isolate themselves, and we have to find a way to break in this war without being offensive, if you know what I mean, And since we are all in the same region, and I think even with Bangladesh, I don't think relations have been affected so badly. This is something that we should put our minds on foremost, first of all. And beyond that, of course, there are other issues. It's been very wonderful listening to all the things about state building, nation building, and also economic development. Myanmar too, I think some figures were I think recited. The number of people in India who don't have access to electricity. In Myanmar, I think only about less than 30%, it's only about 27 or 28% of people have access to electricity. The rest don't. So energy is important too. That's why I pose some of the questions too. So I think I'm grateful that all these very critical issues have been aired, and I think that we should have more dialogues like this, and also try to involve people who can really, get the message across to the key people who, as I repeat, and also have tended to isolate themselves.
Thank you, Doctor. Essentially, what you spoke about was how to enhance interaction between Myanmar and Bangladesh and the rest of South Asia with reference to the particular humanitarian crisis of the refugees who've gone into Bangladesh. That essentially is what you said, and that's a very forward-looking viewpoint, and your view that I think that is something which has to be built upon. The mere fact is that you have recognized the problem, and that is the first step. Now that the problem has been recognized and that there is need for repairing relations with neighbors, that itself is a major step forward.
I think also because whichever way is going to impact upon the neighborhood, one way or the other, whether you like it or not, just because of the physical proximity. And so I'm not forcing any country or any government to do this or that. I think it just becomes natural. I think because of the relations, it would be much better if the neighbors can speak better, rather than someone from far away, or even the UN.
It's very heartening to see that we have views, we have a very positive view on tackling a crisis, the scope of which is beyond the purview of this discussion for obvious reasons. The second thing you spoke about was energy and the need for, you are obviously for regional energy grid.
Yes.
And free movement of energy.
Cooperation on energy too.
So
we know the challenges, we know the problems, but somehow we have to approach that as well.
So this is something which you have endorsed in Toto. Would anybody else like to comment on what our friend from Myanmar has said?
I think he also said that another important point he made was not only the Bangladeshi and the Myanmarese government should speak between them, but also we need to speak to our own policymakers within the states.
It's beyond bilateralism. It's not bilateral.
And he also confessed that maybe in some cases the institutions would be not that responsive to our prodding, but still try we must. That is what he said.
We have to be patient and persistent.
We have to be persistent.
Right. I think that's an extremely important point, and this is something which we would also take forward as part of our report. And a very encouraging feedback from Myanmar
Thank you.
about how to tackle with this crisis. We come next to Dr. Shaheen Afroz. Madam, the knowledge base of all energy issues in Bangladesh. So, could you kindly give us your views, because you have heard now the entire energy panel talking about firstly the constraints, what is preventing us from moving forward, the interplay between SARC and BIMSTEC, the issues of tariffs, the issues of infrastructure, the lack of it more or less, the issues of storage of energy, and so with all this, with all these major constraints, would you like to then give a few concrete suggestions, 1, 2, 3, which are implementable to achieve the grand aim which we are all looking at?
I'll straight away go for 2 points. Number one is today and yesterday we have been over these 2 days we have been talking about regional cooperation and all other things, but again we are narrowing it down to the sub-regional cooperation. What I want to say, and appears that SAR could not do this, SAR could not do that, but actually, if we see, it is we the members of SARC, we have not been able to take SARC to a position where we wanted it to see. So it is not SARC, it is us, whether it is India or Pakistan or other smaller countries of South Asia. We have not done our part to revive or to take SARC to a position where we would like to see. And for that, I think South Asia has been a region of conflict for long, and mutual suspicion and mistrust between the countries have hindered many bilateral and regional initiatives. And although the regional countries have made tremendous progress in removing some of these suspicions, some of them are still there. And therefore, initiatives for trust building should be emphasized. And this can only happen if there is a regional body with institutionalized norm and law, and this can successfully monitor confidence building measure and minimize the risk of conflicts in the region. And here I bring the concept of regional cooperation mechanism to be revived. Instead of writing it off, we have no scope of writing of regional cooperation. Sub-regional cooperation is there, fine, but then regional cooperation mechanism should also be revived. This is number one. Number two, about the energy market. The countries of South Asia, we should move towards regional energy market. The need is there, natural resources are also there, and most likely the market players along with financial resources could also come forward if we want. And but it is the, again, socio-political and diplomatic complexities which stood in the way so far and continue to do so, constraining the process. So energy, all the South Asian countries are energy-starved countries. Here, if we don't have cooperation through certain regional cooperation mechanism, I think whether it is renewable energy or the primary sources of energy, I think the South Asian region cannot fly. So these are the two things that I want to make. These are the 2 points that I want to make. And here I would like to share something about the Nobel laureate. One of the Nobel laureates in economics once said that the essential elements of a good society are 2 things. Number 1 is concern for others, and the other is respect for others. Without that, a society is not a good society. So in South Asia, I am sorry to say, we don't think ourselves as a collective being. South Asia as an entity, as a collective thing, we don't. So to be a good society, to be a society, we have to have this sharing mentality, the concern for others and respect for others. So these are the 2 points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shine. This is all South Asia sitting in front of you, and at the end of the day, while we don't really understand each other and we don't speak this, I mean, we speak different languages, yet we are very comfortable with each other because I think the DNA is the same. So I think we have been chastised very correctly that we need to probably improve the way we deal with each other, and this is coming from the experience of all of us over this period of time. You said give a greater push to regional cooperation. This is something which I think Moez Yusuf said in different words. So, and in principle, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in principle, I think only a fool would disagree. The only problem is to get down to the nitty-gritty. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, how do you resolve the nitty-gritty? So, to that extent, what Professor from Myanmar said about getting down and firstly acknowledging what is what, and probably that's the first step that we'll have to see. As far as having an energy market is concerned, what would you propose? I mean, energy everybody wants. Are we looking at a grand idea? Are we looking at some sort, like the Tatas came to Bangladesh and the gas and all which happened. So are we looking at some sort of grand idea, some sort of a consortium where someone would come and take charge of at least put up a proposal to a few of our governments about having an energy grid of the sort you mentioned, and a consortium made, a special vehicle made, which would then go through this, something like that?
Yes, like something like that.
Is something like that you have in mind?
Yes, something like
Because
that.
otherwise, is there any scope for any bilateral mechanism to really, would that work? Probably not.
Well, bilateral mechanism is already there, but like India, Bhutan, India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, but it has to be a regional thing. Like Bangladesh is interested in to invest in Bhutan, invest in Nepal, but there is a trilateral MOU also, but it has not seen the light of the day. So if it is trilateral or multilateral, there is no harm. So those kind of things, I was, instead of bilateralism, if it can be multilateralism, and it is a South Asian energy market.
Exactly. So we had a BIMSTEC conference here, but that was on cyber security. We just had it last month, and probably when BIMSTEC discusses non-traditional security issues, which I'm sure the Secretariat does. So this is one idea which we could put forward as to, and I'm sure, of course, somebody must have thought of it, but what exactly, at least a project study as to what could be done with this needs to be started. Any views on this? Does anyone have any views on this as to what the lady has just
If
said?
I may just dovetail, because the topic that I was assigned was the blue economy, and I think what she was referring to earlier in her presentation yesterday was about the energy generation from the oceans and so forth. But I mean, there was, in terms of trying to find a way to bring about cooperation, the elephant in the room is not India or Pakistan. Elephant in the room is identity politics. I mean, it's this identity politics that was introduced after the Brits left us that has divided us. And it has also divided my country, Sri Lanka, after India proposed provincial councils to us. So it has sort of got really bad right throughout. And because of the identity politics, egotistical leadership and a lot of the other competing factors have. If you think about why is Hong Kong the most successful country? It's a small city state. I happen to live there for a while, and hence I know about it. As opposed to us, where we have geographic constituencies. Because we have geographic constituencies, the political parties fan the flames of identity politics, differences between people, and they accentuate the differences and bring about allegiance based on sectarian lines. What we need to bring about unity, and I've seen this successfully at Davos. I mean, it's a very successful model. I don't believe that we need a Davos for South Asia, in the sense that we need a sectoral aggregation of interest. If you have sectoral representation being brought, whether it's the shipping industry, telecommunications industry, hospitality industry, pharmaceutical industry, I mean, you take all the sectoral lines. It could be economic sectoral lines, it could be social sectoral lines, it could be animal rights, human rights, what have you, LBGT, whatever you want. But we need to look at it from a sectoral perspective, because that's what will unite us together, because hospitality industry folks, whether it's the hotelier, whether it is the airline industry, all in the travel sector, are united in trying to bring about, let's say, tourism to the region. So visa, I mean, there was a time when you took a visa to come to India, you couldn't get a multiple entry visa to go to the rest of the region. So somebody flies all the way from North America to visit the Taj Mahal, but he can't go to the Maldives or come to Sri Lanka. So these are barriers that prevent the sort of cooperation that we need. So when it comes to, let's say, the fish stocks, why not funding agencies, whether it's FICCI or whichever banks of the respective regions, coming together and creating a regional fund that will fund entrepreneurs in the region to do joint projects with equity ownership, jointly held by different nationalities, for the Bay of Bengal, for whether it is longliners or multi-day fish trawling boats that go out, or whether we do a energy transfer submarine cable between Sri Lanka and India. We tried that. We proposed putting a submarine cable to India to sell power to India and also buy power from India. Of course, there are harmonization issues with respect to the frequencies of the electricity connectivity, but those things are technical things that can be resolved. So the issue is, we have always brought about these conferences and discussion groups piecemeal with different academic institutions, think tanks coming together to discuss it, but they are not the drivers of the sector. Even the political leadership that comes together, ultimately political leaders are elected by the people, they're funded by the business community. So the interest lies with the sectoral interest. It's the sectoral interest that drives it. So I think if we want to bring about sort of cohesion and a new impetus for South Asia, I think we need to, I mean, the SAARC chamber is a failure. I'm not talking about the SAARC chamber, but we need a Davos-like kickstart of bringing the business groups together, and which is why I felt that the blue economy is a fresh slate, because the land-based economy has vested interest. There's a lot of pushback when it comes to companies from whichever country coming in, trying to enter that market. But in a greenfield industry like the blue economy, where there's absolutely no established legacy players, I think we can bring about a lot of cooperation and opportunities together. So that's my view. Thank you.
Without wishing to in any way trivialize what Christopher has said, but the job of the chair is to provoke a little. So if I've got Christopher's comments correctly, initially, I mean, there is an issue about the identity, which is fallout of colonialism and what has resulted in these sort of structures we have inherited. And that is that can be mitigated to an extent by looking at a Davos-like approach, wherein every sector is taken care of in a regional forum. It reminded me of a discussion which we had with a Chinese delegation some time back, and there was someone from trade also, a private player was there, and that private player said that, if we trade, everything will become all right. Of course, the India-China situation is not part of the discussion, but the issue essentially was that if we trade, then things will be fine. Now, that's one approach, yes, things will move to a certain distance, but how do we ensure that the problems which have resulted because of these divisions, that these problems don't resurface again? Like a very telling comment made by Professor Mohit that give yourself 5 years after a treaty and you're back to square one. So I take the point about trade. I take the point about trade, and I take the point about but how do we ensure that the same identity politics does not resurface? So do we live with the identity politics, because we are not looking at, we can only hope for more and more assimilation as time goes. So do we take it that yes, there will always be identity politics of various types? Identity could be caste, color, creed, language, religion, nationality. So we have identity politics, but nevertheless we proceed with probably that is what you're trying to say.
Yes, I forgot to elaborate. As I said, I lived in Hong Kong, and I was wondering why Hong Kong was a successful economy. When the Brits left us, they divided us on sectarian lines for obvious reasons, because they needed to control such a vast territory. But when they colonized Hong Kong, and there was a large China looming in the back trying to stop them from conducting the opium business, the legislature that was created in Hong Kong was created on a functional constituency model. It was not geographic representation. So it was the shipping industry, the hospitality industry. They brought sectoral representation to the legislature. So therefore, the Shanghainese or the Cantonese or the Fukienese, none of those ethnic identity politics that China could have very easily stirred could be stirred, because they were not given a voice by giving them an assimilation right by having a constituency model. So the constituency was based on functional economic constituencies. I think this is a point that we, having suffered from this colonial past, we should think about it. We had this in caste. In our ancient kings, the caste system was about a functional constituency model, although caste then became a pariah word because people started to have second class and first class citizen status. But the point is, the functional constituency model has worked for Hong Kong. Perhaps it's one way of doing it. So what I'm saying is, if you take the Davos, the modern construct of that functional constituency model, Davos brings together politicians who love to hobnob with the billionaires and the zillionaires and the key drivers of the economy. So you bring the business committee together with the political committee for have a discussion. What's happening in all these discussions in the SAARC or our South Asian region, politicians come together separately, academics separately, and you have a minor SAARC chamber which nobody takes care of or doesn't give it much significance. So it's sort of, you dissipated the main influencer who can drive integration. So that's the point. Thank you.
I just want to, I'm feeling provoked. In fact, I registered myself when Professor Muni and Mohid were engaging each other. In fact, between state and nation, there is an intermediate category, that is state-nation. And we are all victims of that. I entirely agree with you. The British left, but they infected us with this European idea of a nation-state. Every nation has to have a state of its own. That was bizarre. We got democracy from the British. We did not inherit the democratic spirit from the British. Democracy became divisive in our midst, because democracy, as we interpreted it, was basically a number game. That resulted in the majority community in each of these states trying to manipulate the state, monopolize the state. And most of the problems that we get to see in our part of the world today emanates from that. We have been sadly victims of this colonial idea of nation state. The sooner we overcome it, the better for us. If you look at the European situation today, they have gone beyond post-Westphalian, they have gone beyond national state. If you look at the European states today, none of them is mononational state anymore, and they recognize it. They go to the extent of granting Scotland the right to secede. We are still rooted in the past, trying to stitch disparate nations together as a monolith. That is the unfortunate part of the South Asian reality. And that the sooner we recognize it as intellectuals, as scholars, the better it is. I think somewhere it has to begin. And the sooner it begins, the better for all of us. Having said that, I completely agree that identity politics plays havoc. But the idea that you brought in is very subversive. And we should recognize the subversive capacity of businessmen coming together. Because they do not respect boundaries. You know, the India-China continued to battle over, what is that goddamn stretch? Dokhalam. And when this was happening, the businessmen from all over India were busy importing materials from China. That didn't stop because their ethics is different. The state ethics doesn't work there. So we have to recognize that. There's a very, very, very interesting point you made because you talked about Davos. Davos is contextualized in a situation where they have overcome this virus of nationalism, the fever of nationalism. We haven't overcome it yet. So, but I am not as pessimistic as many of my colleagues are. If you look at the way we are growing up now, you find democracy is divisive, but at the same level, it has managed to give the marginalized a voice. And we are lucky that they are not claiming statehood for themselves. But this idea of nationality, nationalism, national identity is gone. Maybe the party in power in our country and in party in power in other countries might be trying to emphasize it, but we have overcome that to a certain extent, and we will continue to overcome it as we go ahead. So in that sense, I would say the seeds of this kind of a unitarian approach that you said can be sown, and we can just float it in as an idea. I differ with he's not there now, Mr. Ajay Dixit. Yesterday he said that we should not be idealistic. I think we have to be idealistic when we're situated in a desperate corner of the world like South Asia. So we have to be idealistic. We keep inventing ideas and expect the powers that be to follow them.
Again, yeah, just a minute, please. I just want to say, I mean, it's good that the panel has different views. There's the academic school, which is looking at, as we said, they have to be at least looking at a different world. There's a realist school which has worn uniform for 37 years, another realist school sitting there. So the realist school has seen life and has seen how much time it takes to stitch a nation together, a nation state together. And these are all young nations here across. These are all nations, these are all very, very young. So when we talk about the Westphalian model of 1648 and where they've evolved today in 2018, see the gestation period. In the case of all of us, it is less than 100 years. So really the models there may not apply. What they're doing may not apply because here we are just rediscovering ourselves, and as the last chairperson said, we are transitioning, and we all said that we are continuously refining our concepts of nationalism, which is fine. Notwithstanding that, the idea which is given of moving forward, that at least we have to make the aim of this conference is exactly that let us move forward in places where we can, and business is one place where we can move forward. How do we do it? Do we do it regionally, which is why I asked the question from the lady from Bangladesh? Do we do it bilaterally? Do we do it regionally? If we do it regionally, what are the sectors we select? And that is what we have to sit down. In principle, we all agree, but the problem, I repeat, is always in the specifics. And we will keep evolving as nations, or nation states, but when we have to get forward on these matters, the point is well taken about having a Davos-like approach. Of course, Davos itself, I'm not too sure how long, with the way the winds of trade war are blowing, how much Davos will get affected by that. But nevertheless, as far as South Asia is concerned, what is good for A, B, C, D, E must work forward, and that is what we need to look at. Point is well taken. Yes, please.
After listening to these intense comments, could I make a few of my own? I do agree that we need something functional that we can all work on together, but I'm afraid that the reference to Davos and to Hong Kong may not be so apt. This region has the largest number of people in poverty still, and Davos is now being lambasted for being too capitalist, too liberal, that kind of thing, and Hong Kong too. Well, of course, the British, it was just a trading port. They couldn't have any ethnic constituencies because most of the people there are Cantonese, I think pre-war in Myanmar too, the British did the same thing. There was a legislature, but they were elected on, well, the Chamber of Commerce had one legislator, the Eurasian community had one, The Indians had one, that kind of thing. But now I think we have to think about, well, it's good to have something that can bring us all together, but we don't want to make it, let's say, too neoliberal. What China intends to do with the Belt and Road, you could even say that it's neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics. Well, the amount of capital that they have, the banks that they have, and the business that pours in, I think it's got nothing to do with communism or even with socialism. It's really an aspiring power trying to muscle into the business game.
I think there's no disputing the factual issues, but I think in principle what was meant is that business is the way forward. That in principle is, I think, what you meant.
I don't want to dominate on this point, but I guess the point I was getting to was that when you have a functional constituency model where shared interest groups are coming together, then it's transboundary, right? So if I'm working in the shipping industry is concerned about port charges, the depth of ports, access to ports, the infrastructure, all of that. So if you're working as a group in South Asia, in the Bay of Bengal, and we are the Shipping Industry Forum, then we would be working together to figure out how best we can compete with Dubai ports and Singapore ports and everybody else, and how could we bring the business to our part of the world. So there is a cohesion in a functional constituency model. That's the point.
Absolutely. General.
Thank you, sir. I want to make few points beyond my topic because as a member of this region, I would like to raise a couple of issues. That is, what is the goal of we are talking about integration, a strong region or sub-region. Whatever we talk, what are our goals? Whether we want to be like ASEAN or we want to be like EU, or we want to maintain status quo like current South Asia, which we are today. What is our goal? And who will take the lead? Who will take all other member states on board? I think we need to decide. We need to discuss about this. Otherwise, we will remain at where we are today. That is my personal perception. Secondly, like we are talking about BBIN for last couple of years, but we only heard that acronym. No concept, no structures, no frameworks have come out. So we are talking, neither we are strengthening our regional organizations, neither we are replacing that. If we cannot move forward with the regional current regional framework, we are not even moving forward with new concept, new ideas. So I think we are in between. So I think we have to move forward. Thirdly, in this seminar, I think major issues covered was terrorism, energy, water, trade, and climate change and disaster. These are very important topic. On terrorism, I would like to say that how we define terrorism is most important. Like if you go to US or Western European countries, they have common definition. When you have common definition, most of the problems are sorted out. Like, for example, if one particular country in South Asia has domestic terrorism, other countries regard that as a freedom fighter or some other with some other name, then there is a problem of coming together, perceiving about what terrorism is all about in South Asia. If it is a regional terrorism, common to all, threat to all, then we have to have same kind of definition. So we have to have first of all, common definition to as a platform to move forward in order to tackle these very chronic issues, and the face of terrorism is changing. So we have to come together, basically in definition. That is my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Silwal. Essentially, when you spoke about what is our goal, what is our charter, who's going to take the lead, where is BBIN reached, I think what you're basically bemoaning is the lack of delivery. So what have these things, I mean, where have all these organizations gone, and where has the effort of all these years gone? Nothing has happened actually. That essentially is what you're saying. And again, all of us are sitting here. This is a South Asian failing, I think, because some of us, of course, it's shades of efficiency when it comes to delivery, as to who delivers best, who doesn't. And we have a neighbor, China, which is supposed to be extremely good at this, and probably there is a lot we can learn from this. In the case of India, I mean, you said who's going to be the lead. Obviously, in many cases, it has to be India, because India is the largest country in the region. And while India is the largest country and India is growing at the GDP and all that, the fact is that when you are going, we've given lines of credit, India has given lines of credit to various countries, you know, within South Asia. Also, realizing of the line of credit, the time in which it is given, considering also the efforts of government of India to lift people out of poverty. So the time it takes, these are constraints which we are trying very hard to overcome. But yes, there are glitches as far as delivery goes, and I'm sure this is well appreciated by these things. As regards BBIN, I will ask Dr. Ashok to comment, because BBIN, I have learnt a fair bit about it, but I will ask an expert to speak on it, where exactly it has happened. And lastly, the point about terrorism, the point is well taken, though I think gradually within South Asia the understanding is dawned that a terrorist is a terrorist is a terrorist. I think that is that's getting quite clear everywhere, and we've heard everybody talking. Maybe that definition will also come in time.
I think the SARC ministers have dwelt on it. The working groups on terrorism have dwelt on it, and there is a tentative understanding of what is terrorism and what is not. But as you understand, in the United Nations also, they do not have a common definition of terrorism yet, in the United Nations. And the kind of relationship that we have with each other in this part of the world, it will be very difficult. But that should not stop us from flagging it as a point, that we can flag it. And as regards BBIN, I think the sub-regional idea of sub-regional cooperation was mooted because SARC was not moving forward. Very simple. And in BBIN also we found that the national interests did not converge, even if the political interests converge. So there also we have problems. It's not also coming through. We know the Bhutanese anxiety about environment, and we have to respect that. I think without quoting the person, I can only say there was a way of looking at these differences when they become irresolvable. I think there is a way of going about it. Sit together, keep out issues on which you differ, start working on issues that we agree on, and you can move forward. I think that is the way we can progress. And but the problem is, as Mr. Dharmakirti said, the politicians are not always well advised, and the interests that drive the decisions of policymakers are not uniform, and not all interests are prevalent at the same point of time. They are prioritized as per the context, as per the preferences of the people in government. So there are too many variables out there. But at the same time, I must say that we have to keep all these difficulties and challenges in mind, but we should at least flag this point that a definition of terrorism will make it easier on our part to deal with this menace. I think there is a fair amount of realization in most of the countries today that this is becoming too much of a problem for all of us to handle, too hot a problem for all of us to handle. Pakistan has learned it, Afghanistan has learned it, India has learned it the hard way. So we are all learning that we have to do something about it. Out of that realization, maybe it will come sooner or later. Thank you.
Could I have Dr. Shaheen, any views on BBIN?
No, not really. But BBIN is also, I think it is also stuck. Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. BBIN had a MVA agreement, and all on a sudden, I was there in the DPG discussion group, and all on a sudden Bhutan was there, but all on a sudden Bhutan said that it cannot, its parliament has not ratified, and this and that. In a way, you can say that Bhutan is out of BBIN. So things like that, if things like this happen, regional cooperation is not working, sub-regional cooperation is not working because there are differences among the countries, then what is going to happen to this region?
As regards,
No, there are other areas of agreement, but then
Certain issues are not.
certain issues
basically,
are, yes.
as far as the transport is concerned, the concern was genuine because the roadways are not developed. So maybe that could have been done incrementally, and I'm sure that will happen.
No, but they signed it, and after a year,
Yeah, so maybe
you know,
maybe it will come
they
through
all on a
after
sudden
some
they
time.
realize that it is an environment which is
Environmental
going to
issue.
be
So-
the environmental issues.
So because
So-
that is the only country in South Asia which is giving a lot of stress to environment, we are catching up. We have spoiled our environment. They are trying to preserve it. So they have seen what has happened to us. So that is why they are doing it in an incremental manner. But other than
there will be some problems, but
Yes.
then there should be some solution to those problems. So we just cannot say that this is an environment problem. We have to respect that. So out, this one is out. So this way you don't. I mean, any
so
project
that was
doesn't
only
work,
the motor
you know.
vehicles, but there must be a lot of other things
Other
also.
things.
Lot of other things, yes, but you said incrementally, one by one. So if one by one everything is being, I don't know it is rejected or not, or should I say rejected or not, but one by one, one project is, this is environmentally not conducive, that is not conducive, that is not, then why in the first place you agree? That is the thing. Agreement has been done, everything has been done, and then all on a sudden, after a year or after 2 years, you are saying that it is environment. So I am out. So this, I mean, this way things don't move, and this is the main problem in South Asian context.
Point I made was even if we
We have to keep moving. My problem is South Asia, things should be moving.
But the point is here we have to, as I told you, maybe in cases like this, while we understand, then it hurts us. While we understand it, we have to respect the concern of the concerned party, and
course,
and
it is
start
said,
exploring,
yes.
start exploring other areas of engagement where BBIN can be a success, and then move on and wait till the fundamental resistance from the side gets scaled down and you arrive at some consensus on MBA. But MBA is not the only issue on which BBIN should be measured. A success or failure of BBIN should be measured. Thank you.
So I'll come back to General later for some positive recommendations. So now, Omar, please.
Well, my presentation in this morning was about radicalization. I was asked to speak about that. The whole point is that we should understand the trend of radicalization of Taliban within the broader context of global jihadist fighters. These two cannot be distinguished as two separate issues. Now, for the case of Afghanistan, which is a protracted conflict, it's so much multifaceted and a complex case. You have multiple drivers of conflict, multiple stakeholders, and a long history for that. Peace process has failed. Any sort of forward suggestion that we are giving, at the first stage, it depends on on the character of the conflict. We need to know the character of the parties, their intentions, their claims, their benefits. The past peace process failed. Why? The reasons are the following. One is the fragility or the failure of the state. The state in Afghanistan in the last 17 years, despite major international funding, has not been able to deliver services, good governance, and fair judiciary. The second one is uneven political system in Afghanistan. You have a much diverse society at different level. You have different ethnic groups, linguistic groups, religious groups, and even ideational groups. But you have a highly centralized presidential system. The highly centralized presidential system is not providing accommodation for much of these different constituencies in Afghanistan. I will come back to the point of functional constituencies or cultural diversities a bit later. The third one is lack of political will from the Taliban side. In the last 17 years, you had continuous proposition of the peace offers from the government of Afghanistan, but this proposition of the peace has not been respected or welcomed by the Taliban. So now if we are talking about the way forward, I think for the way forward, we need to address 5 fallacies of the current stage. The first fallacy is the attempt to negotiate the terms or somehow strike a deal in the absence of the people of Afghanistan. At the current stage, everyone is involved in peace process in Afghanistan. The great powers, regional powers, the Taliban, but the absent in the room is the people of Afghanistan and even the government of Afghanistan. And that goes back to the complex nature of the conflict in Afghanistan. Taliban assumes that the party to the conflict is them and the US. Government of Afghanistan is not. Government of Afghanistan assumes that the conflict is between state of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and Taliban is a symptom of that conflict. Pakistanis believe that the conflict is between Indians and Pakistan. US believes that the conflict is between Afghanistan government and Taliban. So there's no lack of consensus. And in this complex scenario, unfortunately, people of Afghanistan is left out. The second one is, so the way forward is to bring back the voices and representation of the people when it is about peace talks and peace process. Second one is the fallacy of that we think that a peace process could happen or a peace deal can happen through appeasement of a radical group which approaches and addresses its claims through use of violence. We need to really answer these questions. Why Taliban did not accept any offer of the peace so far? Just yesterday, you just visit the website of Taliban. They have given 5 press releases, and out of these 5 press releases, 4 of them says that we do not negotiate with the government of Afghanistan. So it's a continuous denial from one side of the party of the conflict, and lack of political will to solve the problem. The third fallacy is that the idea that we have a consensus on the issue of peace inside Afghanistan. President Ghani claims the same thing, that we have built a consensus internally and so many other parties. But this is a fallacy. We don't have a consensus inside Afghanistan. Most recently, a 12-member peace negotiating team has been introduced and a high-level consultative body. Out of 33 members of this consultative body, there are just only 2 women. And these 2 women are from the generation of 1980s. So you have all jihadis who are represented in this consultative body. You don't have anyone from the youth community, the youth constituency. If you are talking about functional constituencies, maybe if you are talking about non-ethnic constituency, we need to ensure representation of women. We need to ensure representation of youth. We need to ensure representation of academia, which has not been represented. And we need to ensure representation of the liberal Democrats. And when you have all these people unrepresented, that means that there is no consensus on peace. These people are left out of the process. The fourth issue is this phrase that we have, and it has been repeated since 2009 by the government of Afghanistan and the Americans, but it has been violated most recently, is the principle of Afghanistan-led and Afghanistan-owned peace process. I understand the fact that in the case when the conflict is, a party to the conflict is the US, we cannot have an exclusionary Afghanistan-led and Afghanistan-owned peace process. But however, we cannot bypass the government of Afghanistan. At the current stage, government of Afghanistan has been really bypassed. It's not part of the negotiation, and no one knows what's going on there. The fifth and the last one, which is the most important one, is the belief that we can reach to a peace through an ad hoc agreement with the Taliban. We had, in last, at least since the time Taliban emerged in the 90s, from then till now, we had a number of agreements with the Taliban also. But all these ad hoc agreements did not result in a tangible, peaceful outcome. So which means that we have deliberately ignored what is called peace building or a positive peace, which is a long-term peace. You need to address peace in a manner that justice should be ensured. The voices of those who has been ignored and violated, that should be ensured and that should be heard. So for a long-term peace, I suppose the first primary principle is sustainability and continuity of the state in Afghanistan. Whatever the state is, whether it is Ashraf Ghani or XYZ, the peace process should not undermine the structure and identity of the state. And because, as Dr. Yusuf was talking, if we don't have a state structure there, then whatever agreement that you will have, that will not last for a longer. And the second one, besides sustainability of the state in Afghanistan, the second one issue is that we should not ignore a people-centric peace process. It could not be just only about interest of great powers. Unfortunately, at current juncture, whatever is going on around peace in Afghanistan, it's about the US, whether they withdraw or they will stay, and what is the interest of the regional powers. We completely denied and avoided what is the demand of the people of Afghanistan and the whole process. Thank you.
Dr. Omar, extremely lucid, putting across his views as he did in the morning as well. There is no consensus on the peace process, and yet there is a peace process underway. So we start with the contradiction. And very well brought out about the various perceptions as to who is fighting whom, depending on which side of the room you are in, which part of the room you are in. So here we have a situation where there is a entity which is not defeated on the battlefield. There is a weariness as far as war is concerned. There is a necessity to bring peace. At the same time, the players who are going to sit and decide on the peace process are the identity of these players remains uncertain. At the same time, the identity of the players who are pushing the process is clear, and this process is going to go through in some manner, and the necessity also is that the government of the day should not be undermined. While the government of the day is suffering casualties, and obviously there are undercurrents as well. So how does one go forward in this, and what does one do?
I also do not agree with this statement that Taliban is winning. I understand that Taliban has been able to challenge the US and the government of Afghanistan and their control of the territory, but you have so much false statistics.
No, I said they have not been
given.
defeated. I didn't say they were winning. I said they have not been defeated.
Yeah.
So there is a difference.
That's the difference, really. Taliban are not winning because they are not popular when it comes to the perception of the people of Afghanistan. I just gave you two citations for this. Asia Foundation in Afghanistan came up with a survey of the people of Afghanistan, and a part of it is covering what people think about peace and the Taliban. My institution, Afghanistan Institute for Strategic Studies, we did a survey of the people on the peace process. Both surveys complement each other, and the finding says this: over 80% of the people do not subscribe to the policies, ideologies, and the method of the Taliban. When this is a fact, when the fact is that Taliban are not popular, so then the question is why they are able to challenge and why we have not been able to defeat them. That question goes back to the lack of governance in Afghanistan, lack of good governance. It's not because of popularity of Taliban or strength of the Taliban to beat the state, but it's about inability of the state in Afghanistan to deliver services, to tackle corruption, and to have a standing army in Afghanistan. So that's why number one issue that I, as earlier said also, is the point of continuity of the state. If we ensure good governance and the continuity of the state, that will solve the problem of insurgency in Afghanistan.
And actually, let us be, I know you have your own emotions about Afghanistan because it is dear to you. But the problem here is we are looking at some conclusion to be arrived at, to be flagged in this consensus document that we will produce, which will A, look at regional peace and prosperity, and B, look at regional cooperation to make this peace possible. Right? So here we can only be a little prescriptive. No, we can only say, for example, the peace process in Afghanistan should involve all stakeholders, right? And the consensus should be built across all groups, something like that. And there should be all functional groups represented in the consultative process. I think we can only leave it like this. I understand, there are several issues to what you were saying. One issue is the dependence on excessive dependence of the government of Kabul on US and the Western forces. The $4.34 billion that are coming from US, runs the government. If that life support system goes off, then Afghanistan will be back to civil war. And apart from that, if Americans are fatigued and they want to run, you cannot possibly stop them forever. So what will happen if the drip is taken off by and by? Maybe 4.4, then it comes to 4, then 3.4, 2.4, like that. There may not be a dramatic withdrawal of help, but there may be incremental withdrawal of help, which will also be equally disruptive of the Afghan state. So in that sense, the excessive dependence of the current statecraft on Western funds also creates a vulnerability which perhaps Americans try to exploit at the moment. That is my reading. But suppose Taliban arrives at some kind of an agreement, you call it ad hoc or whatever, with the Americans. Now yesterday they were there. Today, as we are speaking, they are having conversations. The Abu Dhabi guy is there. Somebody from Pakistan is there. One Saudi representative is there. So they are having conversations. So if they arrive at some conclusions, I do not think at the moment that the Americans will desert the government in Kabul. But there will be some conclusion which may not be palatable to the government in Kabul, right? Because Taliban has clearly stated that they have got nothing to do with Kabul. Clearly stated. So in that sense, I would suggest, and I would be of the opinion that we can only advance this thing, that the process should not be exclusive of any particular group or community or government, even government of Kabul. There should be all stakeholders involved in the peace process.
Sir, just one sentence. Can I make just one sentence, sir? Vishal here, sir. Just one sentence, sir. I think what would be most relevant for this session and for the conference when we are looking at prescriptions, if Dr. Sadr, based on the Afghan experience in terms of ideologically countering Taliban, if we could come out with some prescriptions as to what kind of efforts are on to ideologically counter radicalization, let's say, let's not limit it to Taliban.
That will be the second set of
through school curriculum or or online social media, etc. If you could come out with 2-3
also, I have one more thing. Since we are hosting this conference in India, what would Dr. Omar want India to do? So, two issues.
Okay.
Then we'll wrap it up.
I think this war against Taliban is going much more before the US came into this region. I understand the fact that we are much dependent on the US in terms of finance. But the war was going on against Taliban since 1994. So my concern at this point is the Americans are negotiating Taliban about what? About the future of Afghanistan people. It's not emotional. It's about right of the people to know what's going on in that. So I think there are certain red lines that the US, government of Afghanistan, and Taliban need to know clearly that could not be breached at any cost. The first one is that we cannot replace Islamic Republic with Emirat Islami. If Taliban want to reintegrate, they are welcome to reintegrate. But if they want to replace, that replace is a red line. We cannot go back to 1996. Number two, now when we are talking about a republic as a model of the state, what does it mean? The republic as a model of a state means that there are certain rights of the citizen which has been substantiated in the Constitution of Afghanistan. equality of gender, fundamental rights and liberties of citizens, including the right of the freedom of consciousness and freedom of speech, free press, and whatever that we have exercised in the last 17 years, maybe more or less good or not, that are the red lines. If Taliban now they come that they claim in Moscow format that, oh well, we understand that there's women rights, but then they add something else also there, based on the Sharia law. And we need to ask the Taliban, okay, when you say that we respect women rights, but based on Sharia law, what that Sharia law means to you? That whether that means that women cannot have the same rights and equality in front of the law by men. So that's one. How we can tackle radicalization in Afghanistan? Okay, now we have two different models. One is liberal democracy, which Taliban claim that it has been enforced forcefully by the US in Afghanistan. And then you have a radical theological model of Taliban. The way, are we opting for one or the other? Do we have any other option except this, the Western liberal democracy, and even if that we were discussing earlier about the Westphalian model of the state, or there is any other option? I think we need to go back to history, to our own experiences, our own roots. We had a peaceful experience of Sufism in this region. What sort of interpretation of Islam was practiced almost 500 years ago? Why we should not go back to our history and rediscover our own selves? These all are Salafi Jihadis interpretation which came from Gulf, funded from that madrasas which are funded by the Arabs, or the Deobandi madrasas which are funded by the South Asian circles of mullahs. That has not been practiced in Balkh, Herat, Kabul, Kandahar. We had a moderate Khurasani version of Islam which has been sidelined by all these radical trends. Coming to the last point, what do we expect from India? And if you speak with the strategic circles in Afghanistan, most recently we had India-Afghanistan strategic dialogue with USI. There's a deep concern within the strategic community in Afghanistan that India is not fulfilling its promises to Afghanistan based on the strategic agreement that we had in 2011. So you need to, now what are those things that Afghanistan expect from India? We understand that India is itself a purchaser of the arms. It's not in that capacity to donate or provide arms to Afghanistan. Maybe we can call it India, if not rising power, also it's a kind of reluctant power, that in that capacity that they have, they are not delivering what they have also. Number one demand is a kind of consultation in terms of intelligence level. When we are tackling insurgency or terrorism, I think it's very important to know who the enemy is, who the terrorist is, where are they located, what are their characteristics, and how to tackle them. India has a rich experience in counterinsurgency in different cases, left wings, Islamist, case of Kashmir, and other Northeast. So it's much important to have all this information sharing at the level of intelligence level, and also we need to know about Indian experience, how to tackle all this. At the second level, we need to also have some sort of cooperation in Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior Affairs. And India, I think it has been stated much earlier also, should not be appeasing the other countries in the region. That, okay, because we are concerned of the Pakistan, or we are concerned about what US dictate to us. The understanding in Afghanistan is that Indian policy with regard to Afghanistan has been much shaped by the US policy in the region. If the US ask Indians to engage, then they will engage. If the US shows concern that Indian engagement should be in that certain level and not more, then Indians stop it. I think what we need is that Indians should look Afghanistan from their own standpoint, not from the standpoint of Islamabad, Tehran, or Washington.
I appreciate Dr. Omad's
Concerns about the future.
views, and I think you've given across a very, very stark reality. You've depicted a very stark reality where there are so many contradictory pulls and pushes going on. So we hope that some sense prevails and the voice of the Afghan people is heard. Probably that is the most important thing.
Just last
So-
thing,
so-
very short. India can also, when it comes to peace process, it is for India to support the democratic constituency in Afghanistan.
Okay.
What you have seen in Moscow, Taliban has been given 15 minutes to speak, and the delegation which has gone from Afghanistan 5 minutes. And you will see such kind of sidelining of democratic constituency at different level. There's a constituency called resistance. I do not refer to any geographic or ethnic constituency when I'm talking about resistance. But that resistance constituency, which part of it is the democratic constituency, women of Afghanistan, civil society, that should be backed by the Indians.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadar. Clear suggestions. Coming on now to Dr. Christopher. Anything you would like to say?
I guess on the ocean side that I did not touch upon yesterday was that the one resource that China seems to be currently researching extensively, which has a raw material that both India and Sri Lanka has, is the monazite deposit, which is what you can extract thorium from. And the nuclear program of India has been developing the fast breeder network, in terms of fast breeder technology, and you're quite advanced in that. And that's a precursor for developing thorium reactors. Since energy is the issue that whole of South Asia faces, and this is an abundant resource that is there in the Bay of Bengal, I think it's important for India to not just look at cooperating with Brazil in developing the fast breeder reactor technology that's required for thorium, exploitation of thorium. I think you need to look at including countries like Sri Lanka and others who have thorium deposits and have a joint technical scientific collaboration to develop that technology. As to where that gets hosted in terms of the nuclear power plant, I think so long as the transport transmission line network is established, after all, if Europe can still buy its gas from Russia and have those energy lines established, we can certainly have the electricity transmission lines established in the region, looking at superconductivities to reduce the transmission power losses. But we need to focus on developing the reactor technology jointly for the joint exploitation of the region. Otherwise, what's happening is some of these resources are being sold as a commodity level, and we are losing out the economic potential. Equally, the titanium-bearing ilmenite sands that, again, South India has and Sri Lanka has, it's only costing a $200 million investment to convert that into a titanium industry, whether it is for paint pigments or whether it is for titanium metals. The investment is not very big, but we haven't done it. We export it for $40, $60, $120, $180. The value chain of the titanium industry is $16,000 equivalent value for a ton that we sell for $180. Why are we allowing Rio Tinto and these other companies in Australia to dominate this? I'm glad that India has dominated the steel industry with the Mittas taking over some of the industries overseas. But we need to look at the resources we have and have a strategic plan to dominate that value chain totally. Together, not exclusive of other. And that's what's needed. And so we need to look at the carrying capacity of the resources that we have in the oceans, see how we can come together and look at all of the product lines that can be developed out of those resources that we have, look at the technologies that we need to acquire or invent and deliver upon that. And that should be the trajectory that we should be working on for the blue economy. Thank you.
I think two very solid suggestions, and I have not heard of, maybe I am I have not been following this, but as far as cooperation on reactor technology with Sri Lanka, especially with regard to thorium, is something new. And this is something which we are listening, and we'll go into this. And this is one good recommendation, as also the other one about titanium. Thank you, Dr. Christopher. We move on to Dr. Moed Yusuf. Your views, sir, and the cliche, the way forward, so to speak.
Thank you. First of all, thanks again for the invitation. This has been a fantastic conference and a very, very good topic to pick up for IDSA. So I actually made the mistake of putting 5 or 6 specifics in the way forward when I spoke in terms of what we could do together. But let me just elaborate on a couple. One, let me just begin by saying that the first thing we should acknowledge at the end of 2 days, 2 very good days, is that we are not doing well. Sometimes we become nationalistic to talk about how one is doing good, others not, third is doing good, fourth is not. Ultimately, as a region, the theme for cooperation, I was talking to Dr. Afroz yesterday and saying if somebody was sitting on Mars and looking down on South Asia, they would see this as a complete mess. And I think we need to acknowledge that. I did a book in 2013-14 called South Asia 2060, Envisioning Regional Futures, basically looking at long-term future of the region. Edited volume with about 20-25 short chapters. We could not get hardly anyone to agree to write. And the immediate response people gave was, "Yeah, I've never thought of South Asia. I can write on India, I can write on Pakistan, Maldives, blah, blah, but region, I don't know." So there's a problem here. So the first suggestion I have is to have more forums where we can have genuinely regional conversations on either specific functional issues or larger political issues. I would also add as a suggestion that the next time we have this kind of very interesting and fruitful conversation, whether it's here or anywhere else in the region, we try and make it a 1.5. We have some officials who come and listen and maybe even speak and have a conversation around that. I think one of the problems in South Asia, sir, Jalal Sahab, you mentioned the uniform and 37 years, and then Ashok sort of mentioned idealism, is that this realism and the academic part of it do not interact and intersect nearly as much as we should. And so this is the beauty. I mean, there's an academic view and there's this practical view. They somehow have to come together, because from my world, the practicing people are too conservative in terms of change, and from your world, rightly, we are too maverick. And so how do you actually bring this together? So another suggestion I would have is have dedicated dialogues on the regional issues between people in the system and people outside the system. Third, if I may suggest, and perhaps I don't know how to frame this, let's begin with low-hanging fruit. Let's begin with things that we have agreed to as a region and are doable without inventing new things and sort of having, mega changes, and can move forward. Let me give you a simple example, not my field, Dr. Afroz's field, but still, CASA 1000, TAPI, agreed to, signed, sealed, funded, and we're sitting on it. Why not at least have movement on things that in our infinite wisdoms we've already agreed to? So something about low-hanging fruit I think should go in your report. Fourth, I think we should recognize as states that the sheer number of under 29 in this region are going to drive the future, no matter how states prevent this from happening. Why not have dedicated conversations among the young entrepreneurs, the young politicians, the young technologists, the young energy specialists, whatever? I have sponsored a number of track twos from the USIP perspective or platform. I find young people thinking differently. It's not good or bad. It's not better or worse. It's different. And we need to bring that in to this conversation on regional integration or reintegration or whatever we want to call it. So that's the other point. Two other things I'll say is, you mentioned identity politics. I completely agree with you, except that I think it is impossible to reinvent this wheel. I don't think we can start from scratch. So one could argue that the colonizers did a fairly good job of what they wanted to achieve. How do we now inject politics of inclusion into this conversation. Identity is always going to be there. I think it's going to be divisive and all of that. But can we bring in politics of inclusion? And the way I would say is, if we can't collaborate on that, at least researchers, I would give you a very practical suggestion. IDSA should collaborate with institutions in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and wherever, and somebody else should collaborate to talk about lessons of where South Asian states went wrong versus right in terms of politics of inclusion, and what the implications were of getting it wrong. I make a very provocative comment here. I won't name any country, but I was talking to friends yesterday over dinner. I see some South Asian states copying 100% the mistakes of other South Asian states from about a decade or 2 decades ago. And to expect a different outcome through the same actions is, paraphrasing Freud, insanity. I see this happening every day. So we need to actually at least learn lessons from others who got it right or wrong, and sort of deliver that. And the final point I'll make is that we need to start shifting to a conversation that forces us to introspect as states. Here I go state unilaterally. A conversation where we can point at others, and that's fine, that's politics. But let's talk about what we can fix internally, even to take away the ability of the external actors to mess up things. There are many things that can be done internally, where things could improve without having to look at how to fix everything outside the borders. So that's essentially how I would summarize, I think, some of the things for your report. If you allow me, I would make 2 other suggestions for the Afghanistan conversation, not that I'm the expert here. One, I think something about regional pact on non-interference in Afghanistan, and an agreement that Afghanistan's territory will not be used to undermine others. Some language around that, because ultimately, without that regional consensus, you'd keep having this problem in Afghanistan. And the second suggestion there, or not a suggestion but just a point, is not to put anything in your report that seems to suggest that we've drawn conclusions of what is happening in the peace process. It's too soon, it's too early, we don't know. I mean, quite frankly, not as a defense of US policy, but just to put this out there, I have not heard any US conversation, private or public, talk about giving up on women, giving up on youth, giving up. That could be a concern and a fear, and it may be right. But I think it's unfair to say that there's been a decision that says, okay, everything thrown out, here is the key to Afghanistan and the Taliban will take over. I don't think we're anywhere near that. Now, what the outcome may be, I don't know. But all I'm suggesting is, let's not put too caustic a conclusion that may suggest a certain leaning to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. I assure you that we are not going to come to any conclusion on Afghanistan and IDSA as of now. It's too premature. We learn by the day. We learn by the day. We've heard Dr. Omar give an excellent exposition. We've heard you. We understand the dynamics, and we also understand. I'm quite sure that the anxieties voiced about going back to the Stone Age are anxieties which are well understood by other countries, and which I am sure that that's not going to happen. But what is going to happen, we don't know. So we are only seeing some very, very blurry contours with meetings in different countries at different time frames. So let's see how it goes. You conceptually are absolutely right as far as low-hanging fruit is concerned, and discuss more on this matter, more forums on South Asia, and all functional issues. Luckily today, this evening, all that we've spoken about in this session are functional issues. So that is at the end of the day, if I conclude that notwithstanding our differences, nationalities and religion and traditional animosities, if we identify a set of issues on which we can cooperate and go for them, again incrementally, since we don't want to come a cropper on like we did on the motor vehicles agreement. So if we decide that, and at the end of the day, if this is what we can do, identify 3, 4, 5 things and go forward, probably that is what we'll have to see. And I think a good way to examine that would be to see what SARC has agreed on, what BIMSTEC has agreed on, see what is common and push those and analyze it ourselves as to what is the best thing to do. Yes, ma'am, please.
We need to see regional organizations in the context of ground realities. Basically, when we talk about developed countries and developing countries, there's a huge difference. As Chair also mentioned, they have a huge century-old nation-state system, and we are quite new in that context. And they have a bloody 100 years war, Napoleonic wars, and other wars in order to come to that stage. So, European Union is a case of integration, where you have in European Parliament, you have a common currency, a common market. So that means pooling of sovereignty, which definitely is not possible in South Asia, where we people actually hold sovereignty so dear to ourselves that we are not even willing to share it even in the non-political issues. And also at that time, France and Germany, they want to institutionalize the two big powers and also want to have Germany as a power, predominant power to be a part of European Union. Also, they had the external support of many other powers and all, including, of course, United States. Same is the case with ASEAN. ASEAN was formed to institutionalize Malaysia and Indonesia's coming together, end of their conflict. Again, during the Cold War, they had the support of ASEAN and United States, and they were against communism. So communism was kind of an external actor which brought them together. And it was only towards the end of the Cold War that other 4 countries became part of ASEAN. So we in South Asia, we can only have, as Chair and others have mentioned, we can only have functional or incremental cooperation. We can't have something like an intergovernmental organization like European Union.
Our last speaker for today, Dr. Ashok.
Going over the recommendations that previous delegates in previous years have made, and I can assure you about 70 to 80% of what we discussed today we are already covered. So, and what more was there, and one was, what you said, we do not know much about each other. That intercultural learning was also one of the issues that we had flagged earlier. And in addition to that, what has come out today is this, the discussion on permafrost, for example, glacial studies, basin management. The permafrost is an addition, but other things were already there. I can only tell you that, lot of the issues that we discussed today, and maybe the way we presented it today was slightly different from what we did earlier, but all this 1.5 track, counter-terrorism cooperation, even we went to the extent of saying that since most of these countries are sending troops to United Nations peacekeeping operations, and there should be a joint training program here in the subcontinent, in the region, not subcontinent. So these were all discussed, but the things that have been added to this year's basket, which we did not discuss today, are very interesting. The case Srinivas talked about the science diplomacy, which technology diplomacy or science diplomacy, which is very, very encouraging, very interesting. I think we have talked about medical diplomacy, SARC medical diplomacy, and SARC science diplomacy is also another important thing that we should recognize. I must tell you an anecdote. There was a friend of mine who is working on basically biogenics in JNU. I had invited him to be here. He had a lot of interesting tales to tell. How unofficially they are interacting with scientists in Pakistan and Bangladesh and other places, and they are discussing a lot of issues which pertains to ethics, bioethics. So it's very interesting. I wanted him to be here, but his mother was unwell. He couldn't come in. But at the end of the day, these are the new additions that have crept in. One is urban planning. This is an important issue for all the South Asian states because we are urbanizing at a very fast rate. If there can be some lessons learned, some best practices which can be discussed and shared, it will be very interesting for all of us. And disaster management has already been there, in the bouquet. So on the whole, I would say that we have a very rich conversation at the end of the day, and all these suggestions that we have put together that may look very utopian for the policymaker, but at least we are flagging them for as food of thought for them in future to make their policy on. We know that so far the cooperation in this region has been weak and suboptimal. There is a limited knowledge about various issues that we want to discuss. The state capacity is very weak and inadequate. State will is suspect, intent is suspect. But when we are dealing with all these challenges, I think we have now come out with a bouquet of recommendations which will, we hope, will definitely give an idea, give a sense of what people of the region are thinking to the policymakers in all the countries. We plan to publish it as an outcome report. We will send it to all of you, and if you can add and subtract, you do that. Then we will send it to all of you so that you can push it through your channels to the respective foreign affairs divisions, so that they too become aware of this kind of effort happening at certain level. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this South Asia conference, and you've just heard Dr. Ashok. You've just heard Dr. Ashok saying that 70% of what we have talked about was covered earlier in some form over the years. But the fact is that if we are still talking about it, obviously we need to talk about it. And it's better that we talk rather than not talking and forgetting. At least the issues are alive. And as I was just mentioning that its delivery mechanisms in South Asia are weak. But we have identified what we have to do, and as long as we are there, and as you spoke, as Dr. Yusuf spoke about the younger generation, as long as these things are passed on, that these are the things which can be done. Because at the end of the day, what we are looking for is a better quality of life, and for that, whatever we can do, we must do incrementally with the consent of all. And despite, rather, not getting into the politics of it, which will always dominate, which will prevent certain things going through, which national interest will always prevail. However, what can be done through mutual accommodation and understanding is something we will follow. It's been a great pleasure to host such a erudite, experienced set of mix of academics, professionals from across South Asia, and I've been here 2 years, and I will not be wrong if I say that this conference, this meeting has produced probably the best meeting of minds. There's a mail which I've got just this morning from someone who was there for the whole of yesterday, and he has complimented IDSA on the quality of its presentation, which means the people who have come from across South Asia for us. I thank you very much, and I wish we could have stayed longer and discussed many more of these things, but every conference has to end. And one looks forward to interacting with you all over time, maybe here, maybe elsewhere. And one prays that your endeavors meet with all the success that they deserve. Thank you very much. I will now request our conference coordinator to kindly give a vote of thanks.